Okay, welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning and Zoning Committee. Today is Tuesday, December 9th, 2025. It is 1:01 p.m. I'm the chair of the committee, Andrew Owen. I'm joined by my vice chair, Scott Reed, joined in chambers by Council Member Betsy Ruey, Councilman Jeff Hudson, Councilman Khalil Batchan, and others will probably be joining us shortly. To start off here, the Bingham Fellows class of 2025 was focusing on housing, and they can tell you a little bit more about it, but they broke their class up into a couple of different groups, and this particular group was focused on a project that's related to affordable housing finance, kind of broadly speaking. And so they asked if they could have some time to kind of present what they came up with in their Bingham Fellows class to us. And I'm aware of what they've done, and I think it's a really cool project and potentially a cool tool for Metro Louisville to build more affordable housing. And so I was happy to offer them some space to present to us. So if you guys want to come up and introduce yourselves, and tell us about your project. In the meantime, we've been joined by Councilman Kevin Bratcher in chambers.
There we go. Can you hear me better now? Councilman Owen, thank you. As he mentioned, Rob Locke and I were on the same team in this year's 2025 Bingham Fellows class.
Clark, can you introduce yourself just for, maybe you did and I missed it, but.
Yes. So I'm Clark Welch with GLI, but representing Bingham Fellows today, and I'm with Rob Locke, President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity. He's also representing our group with Bingham Fellows today. So as Councilman Owen was mentioning, we did break into three groups across the cohort. There were about 45 participants and roughly 10 or 11 people in our group. And the topic for this year's Bingham Fellows was attainable housing or workforce housing. And our project or our tool that we've developed focused on more of the financial piece associated with filling that need and the gap. And so what I thought we'd do is, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I thought we could kind of talk through some of the context and set the stage for the need or the demand for an additional tool as we saw it. And then I'll turn it over to Rob in a few minutes to kind of talk through the specifics of the tool itself and how we see it hopefully being implemented. We're really looking at this as a conversation starter, so please think of this as an open dialogue if you have any questions or comments along the way. So I did want to just kind of start by talking a little bit about the economic challenge. So one of the benefits, and I don't think neither Rob nor I had the situational awareness before Bingham Fellows, but we heard from a number of local and regional and even state experts on the topic of affordable housing, attainable housing. And so when you look at kind of the landscape today, there are about 1 in 5 proposed attainable housing units actually being built. And there are a variety of different reasons for that. You can look at the overall development community. They may want to build the right number of houses in this particular demographic across the city, but construction costs are rising, land's expensive. Traditional lenders often see workforce housing as riskier investment. And where the Louisville Affordable Housing Trust Fund, or LEHTF, has stepped in, it typically, in years past, only has the resources to fund that 1 in 5 attainable housing units in any given year, depending on the funding levels. And so what that creates over time, no surprise, is sort of a bottleneck or a pent-up demand for this type of product across the regional economy. In terms of setting the context related to workforce housing, one thing that really stuck out to us was the fact that nearly half of renter households in Louisville are cost burdened, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their pre-tax income on housing. And so we worked, Curtis Stauffer with the Kentucky Housing Corporation was a part of our group, and they had recently done a report that found that there were over 40,000 housing units that were still in need of being built across Jefferson County. And so that really stuck with us and our group as the months kind of ticked away from when we kicked off in January to today, looking at what are some tools or what are some things that our group can come up with to help solve for this gap in the market. And it affects a lot of our essential worker fellow citizens, like, teachers, nurses, manufacturing workers. When you look at this kind of 51 to 110% of AMI, that's a huge portion of the population. And so we were trying to think of what are ways that we can meaningfully impact that work while also complementing and building upon a lot of the work that's already been done. So we came up with a tool that I will turn it over to Rob to introduce, but the name of the fund that we are proposing is called Louisville Home Capital. And I think I'll let him give specifics, but the intent is to try to build upon a lot of the conversations we've had. Many Metro Council members were nice enough to meet with us and discuss this idea. We've had meetings with the private sector, a variety of other community stakeholders, and we feel like we're in a good spot. We've done some good due diligence to be able to hopefully take this to the next level. So Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Clark, and thanks, Council, for spending some time with us today. Louisville Home Capital is the first of its kind private impact investment fund designed to expand the reach of the Louisville Affordable Housing Trust Fund, not replace it. Here's how it works. Louisville Home Capital provides low-interest loans to workforce housing projects that apply for LAHTF funding and meet their underwriting standards. Funds are loaned to developers at 4% interest, and they will subordinate to bank loans. And while my staff thinks I work for the Bingham Fellows or have for the last 11 months, I actually run the 8th largest single-family home building organization in Louisville. And I can tell you, affordable capital would help me do my job and my peers do their jobs. Funded projects focus on building homes for the workforce. And so specifically, these are folks that earn 51 to 110% of area median income. They're the people in the slides, the teacher, the nurse, the first responder. And while it varies based on household size for a family of 4, that annual income is $48,000 to $106,000. So we are literally talking about the people that make Louisville work, who struggle to be able to afford a place to call home. I think if there's one thing to leave with you guys, it's that housing, from our perspective, is also economic development. And so those jobs, housing is where jobs go to sleep at night. The fund itself, our goal is to raise $10 million a year for a total of $50 million. Imagine the impact that that could have. And as a public-private partnership, the goal is to set it up so that the private funds actually not only fill gaps in investment projects, but encourage Metro Council to continue the important work of funding the trust fund. Louisville Home Capital, as a private impact investment fund, will match all the funds above $10 million that are allocated to the Louisville Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So if there's 15 allocated, 5 million of the 10 million is released. If 20 are allocated, 10 million are released, creating a public-private partnership that has accountability and true partnership. If Metro falls below 10 million, Louisville Home Capital will pause its investment for the year. But we need leaders. We need people to invest in this fund. Smart leaders, strategic leaders, leaders that love our city. Impact investment funds like this exist in Indianapolis, in Cincinnati, in Nashville. The model is proven. It unlocks stalled projects, it accelerates development, and strengthens public-private partnerships. The investment part of this fund is designed by finance professionals to provide a return of investment dollars. But the return on investments is really the impact part of this fund, because that $50 million actually has the potential to yield $500 million in leveraged investment. Imagine the impact in our community if we could activate projects to help more teachers, nurses, emergency responders have access to the power of home. The two ways that this fund will make a change, one is the gap financing piece, and the other one is to make a statement that we want more workforce housing and to encourage Metro government to continue to support the trust fund. Louisville Home Capital is an economic solution to increase the supply of workforce housing, but behind every stalled project or every one that's successful is a real family, a real worker trying to make ends meet. We think Home Capital is a linchpin to improving workforce housing. We need champions, business leaders, investors, community partners. And by definition, Louisville Home Capital is a public-private partnership, so Metro Council is a key community partner needed to make this partnership work. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." Well, here we are in our beautiful city of Louisville that we all love, with the opportunity, the resources, and the responsibility to make change happen. So let's do what we can with what we have right now. Let's invest in our city and in the people who make it work. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I want to mention that we've been joined by committee member Josie Raymond online during the presentation, so I wanted to acknowledge that. We've also been joined in chambers by Councilman Piagentini. Is there anybody else online? No? Okay. I'll ask the question that I asked you before, just so everyone else can hear the answer. I mean, obviously, you know, I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's a you know, you guys were assigned a topic, and how do you fill a need? And I think you've come up with a really interesting tool to do that during your Bingham Fellows class. How much effort has gone into kind of reaching out at this point, reaching out to people who might participate in that fund, or as far as fundraising has gone? What's the feedback been? Have you started doing that yet?
We have started that outreach. So just for everyone's awareness, the kind of the goal that we were working towards when the graduation for Bingham Fellows happened 2 or 3 weeks ago was to get to a place where we had the structure in place. So much time was spent talking about how a CDFI gets involved, and how would that work with the private structure, and Metro Council's conversations on its interest in this concept. And so we're just now entering that next phase of, we feel like we have a pretty well-established framework, and we're having, I think we've probably had 6 or 8 conversations with potential investors, local regional banks, some private companies that may be interested in parking patient capital in a fund like this. So it's early, but we're starting to have those conversations.
And as a follow-up, I remember, you didn't touch on it too much in the presentation, but my understanding previously was that the fund wouldn't have its own underwriting infrastructure, that you would rely on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund's underwriting. Is that still the idea?
That's right. So one of the things in looking back at previous Bingham Fellows projects is that, you know, this is a group that convenes for a year, and there's typically, with whatever issue, there's an existing framework of work that's done and done well, and we didn't feel like we needed to create another entity to do that, that this would be capital that would undergo underwriting by LEHTF and adhere to its standards, because they're already in the business of doing that. So this would be additional private dollars that would help amplify the public investment that's already been made.
Councilman Bratcher.
Yeah, I just have like 3 questions, if I don't mind. If you go to page 5 of 11, it says focused on workforce housing, qualifying income for a family of 4. Is that the kind of housing you're looking for? Is like housing that fits up to 4 people, or what? Do you have any input on what the project is?
We would not have impact on the project itself. It would be,
Or was this just general facts here?
these are general facts, but it's
Okay.
designed to show for a family of 4 what the average
Okay.
income would be
Yeah.
for that family between 51 and 110% of area median income.
Okay, and then if you quickly go to 8 out of 11. And so where are you in this flow chart?
The big box in the center, Home Capital Fund.
Yeah, okay. And where would the Metro Council be? Metro Public Funds?
Top left,
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to gather money from those different groups that are interested. Are they interested in getting a return on their investment? Is that the deal? Or like philanthropy would not be necessarily, but a
Right.
bank or employer would, right? I'm
We
just
are-
trying to understand the flow chart a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So it's currently what we are proposing is not philanthropy. So it is, the idea is that capital will be returned, although at a modest level of return. So the focus is on returning capital generally, and if that return is 1, 2, 3%, if it was parked in a fixed income asset wherever, and it's a modest return today, this would be an opportunity for those same entities to park the capital with an organization and a structure that would be investing in this community and having an impact. The idea is an impact investment fund, so that you're seeing the benefits here as opposed to in a more moderate fixed income class asset elsewhere.
So a regular bank wouldn't want to invest into this?
I think that they would, and that's one of the reasons we've structured it this way, is there's an opportunity for both CRA credits as well as partnering with a CDFI for banks to benefit from making these patient capital investments. And there are other revolving loan funds that exist in the city where banks have invested. So it's not that this is a novel concept, it's just within the housing space that I don't believe that a tool like this exists.
Clark, tell us, for those of us who don't know what CRA credits are, if we can just tell us what that is.
Sure, and
It's Community Reinvestment Act.
Yeah, it's Community
CRA,
Reinvestment Act, and
If you
there's
don't
a-
remember what the acronym stands for, yes.
you're looking for what it is or what the acronym stands for?
Why a bank would want to invest money to satisfy its CRA requirement, kind of.
Yeah, and
Okay, well,
I
I'm
don't
gonna take
know
it.
that I know the specifics on that, but if,
Yeah, so Councilman Bratcher, to your question, a bank would not want to invest market rate capital in this fund. They
Why?
would
Why?
want to invest, because we wouldn't be able to return more than 2, 3%. Hopefully, we'd be able to take care of the time value of money, but the reality of a lower, so cost of capital right now, if I had to go borrow capital in the open market for a land development project, I'd be lucky to get something maybe 7%, because it's short-term capital, I'd be looking to return it in 3 years. So to be able to get it at half that rate, or 3 or 4%, I'd be thrilled. I can't do that easily now. And that's the strategy of this fund. But CRA essentially says to banks, hey, it's a federal rule that says if you want to expand your work, if you want to merge, if you want to grow, if you want to do more, then you have to make sure you are investing in all parts of the community where you're also taking money out of. So that all banks, at least right now, do some form of CRA investment. So this would be an investment in which they wouldn't make as much money, but they are indeed investing in their community. I'll just say that some of the conversations I've had with companies that are managing literally hundreds of millions of dollars in private capital is a conversation about, are you parking it in index funds? And most of them are. If it's good enough for Warren Buffett, it's good enough for large corporations. Well, why not take 5% of it and park it in Louisville? Instead of saying, I'm going to invest in the little pieces of everything all over the United States, I want to invest in my hometown. I want to take some small piece, some portion of the tithe, and leave it parked here for 5 years, because I think it can make a difference. So that's the idea of some of those pieces at the top, is to say, for those people that have that capacity to park a portion of their funds to encourage the development of both workforce housing and of Louisville, because Clark will tell you more than me that when companies look to come to Louisville, they want to know about housing and childcare.
Sure, yeah, makes sense. Just a silly question, sometimes I try to test the envelope, but if some guy in here hypothetically just took off with the money and went to Costa Rica, who would be on tap for paying the banks back and the investors back? Would it be the Metro Council? Or is that a...
No, because if you look at this diagram, it's, the funds are segregated. So instead of, it's a subscription agreement. So if we find a company or a private individual who wants to invest in this fund, they're buying subscriptions into Louisville Home Capital for whatever that particular subscription may be. Let's just say it's $1 million. So that money is living in a fund that is separate from whatever public investment is made. So there's no commingling of funds.
And the last question is, thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Owen. It says on the first page or second page, it says, or the fifth page, it says, Louisville Home Capital is a first of its kind. Is that first of kind in Louisville or anywhere?
No, it's the first in kind in Louisville. There are other cities that have implemented
Yeah.
similar tools.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Councilman Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Rob and Clark. I think this is really good stuff and has, bless you, great potential. You had mentioned Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Nashville. Do you have any data that you can share with us in terms of how their program is performing? She's worn off on me.
I did speak personally to one of the funds in Nashville, the Pathway Fund, and they were set up to help purchase projects out of low-income housing tax credits. So after 15 years of serving low-income folks, they typically are going to market, which often can be a good thing. Of course, in Nashville, the market's exploded, and so you're looking at a transformative change in the volume of affordable units. And so that's, the Pathway Fund was created. It's fairly new, but I could probably get the data on it in terms of how they've done. The other one I spoke to was kind of the Enterprise Community Fund that funds all over the United States. They're based in Washington State. And I will say that my connection to them was through Habitat International, and so we borrowed capital at just under 5% through them. And so I can tell you that if I could get it at 4% in Louisville, I'd be thrilled. So I think they're doing fine, but if there's specific interest in the funds that are in those spaces, we could probably gather that data. Councilman Reed.
I think that would be it's always helpful for us to see how other cities are doing. And, from my perspective, my biggest concern, although I think this is something that's desperately needed in this city, badly needed, obviously my biggest concern is what's Metro Louisville's exposure going to be? How much public money are we talking? Will this be something that's ongoing? If the private equity doesn't come in as planned, is Metro Louisville going to be on the hook for a certain amount of money to keep the fund going? Because as we know, public money is, to me at least, it's sacred, and we don't know how things are going to be from year to year. The last few years have been pretty good, but I've also been part of budgets that have been very tight. So my concern would be, what is our exposure going to be? What's the expected level to Metro Louisville 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road? Is it capped? Is it a percentage? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so Rob mentioned this a little bit in, let me see if I don't know if it's still on the slides, but the way that we intentionally structured it is Metro Council, to some level over the last 10 years, has made an investment with public dollars into LEHTF. And those investments and conversations will evolve in coming years, I suspect, as well. We looked at the public-private partnership as a structure to help ensure that investments in attainable housing are continued going forward. So the concept, as we've proposed it now, is if Metro Council allocates $10 million to LAHTF in any given budget year, at that point, the private fund, Louisville Home Capital, with private dollars, would match dollar for every dollar above 10 million that Metro Council allocates. So that if Metro Council allocates $15 million next year, the delta between 10 million and 15 is 5, so Louisville Home Capital would come with $5 million of private capital, with a cap of, if we are successful in reaching our fundraising goal of 10 million a year, it would be capped at that 10 million mark. So again, the funds are distinct, separate buckets of money. The public dollars are not being commingled with the private dollars, but it's an incentive for Metro Council to make the investment above 10 million because it's being leveraged dollar for dollar with private dollars.
But and I hear what you're saying, but to be clear, none of the Affordable Housing Trust money is going to be used for this. Is that correct?
Used for the Louisville Home Capital?
Yes.
Correct. They will be separate loans, they are separate funds, but they will all be funding attainable housing projects.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councilman Piagentini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick clarifying question, then a couple details. The slide that says nearly half of renter households are cost burden, I've always had an issue with this data point, and nobody's been able to answer this yet. How much of that is self-inflicted versus not self-inflicted? And to be clear about what I'm saying, I have both anecdotal and macro data that show that people want to live in certain areas of the city, regardless of their income. And so they'll say, well, I want to live in the Highlands. The Highlands isn't cheap, right? And I'm not picking on the Highlands because the East End ain't cheap either, right? Or they'll say they want to live in the East End. And so they will extend themselves to 40, 50% of their household income going to housing when there's other areas of the city they could live in for much less. So that is a decision they're making because of preference versus their inability, right? In other words, versus external forces. So do we know how much of that those cost-burdened households do so by choice versus do so by circumstances outside of their control?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the answer is subjective. I don't have data that shows. I don't know that that data exists.
Okay.
It's a valid point.
Yeah, and I'll point out, Councilman Arthur, when he was here, he actually pointed out my district is something like third in the city in cost burden status, but most of those folks are moving into brand new homes. I mean, so, and I could tell you, even within home ownership, this is true. I know many people who, let's just say, buy well beyond their means. They did that by choice. And if they're sort of quote unquote house poor because they decided to buy a $600,000 home instead of a $400,000 home when there were plenty of $400,000 homes in the market. That's not the market's problem. That's a personal choice.
I don't have I'm brainstorming here in live time with you, but I don't have the data to back this up. But I think maybe a more objective data point to think about is the proportion of housing units relative to the population, because that would create a correlation between supply and demand. I don't know that I'm not aware of any data that exists to talk about your first question, Councilman, but it's a valid concern.
And because, for example, I just pulled up an article, and Mayor Greenberg rightfully touted this. Louisville is ranked 9th out of the top 100 cities in the United States as of being the most affordable to live in. Your average, and I'll quote from the article, quote, Louisville is ranked, home buyers can expect to pay about $241,000 for home in the city. and it has, as a percentage of median household income, most people are at 17.1% of their household income going to household expenses. It's one of the lowest percentages in the country. So with a target, you want to stay below 30%, I think, is the target. You know, as a general statement, we're doing pretty good. So specifically to this fund, why is there this need for, and actually it's good that this slide is up, this matching expectation on taxpayers, right? In other words, I think this is an interesting idea. I think it'd be great to at least try this out to some degree. But to get, for example, to even 5 million released, you need 3x the commitment from taxpayers in order to get to that. To get to the dollar amounts that you're talking about on slide 6, which is 10 million a year, you would need $20 million of taxpayer funds dedicated to this. So why is there such an expectation on taxpayers to put up for this? If this is a good idea, and I'm not disputing it is, you know, why does it matter how much money we're putting in, and why this, who came up with the $10 million threshold?
So let me answer the questions in two parts. We looked at historical data over the last handful of years, 5-10 years, of typically what Metro Council has been investing on an annual basis into LAHTF. And like any public-private partnership, we thought, well, on average, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million. And that's not an exact science. That was just a rounding
right,
function.
yeah.
So we thought if historically that's been the case, or the baseline, this would be a way to amplify with private dollars an investment that the public sector historically has been making for some time.
Okay. So it was just based on historical data. There wasn't some other market analysis that said, hey, we need this $10 million for X reason.
Well, so it goes back to the affordability piece, and I agree with you that when you look at Louisville relative to many of its peers, we are a relatively affordable place to live. I do think that there is a strong argument to make that there still is an affordability challenge in many parts of the community. And so we were looking at this as more of a proactive tool so that the problem doesn't get away from itself. If we're able to continue to invest public and private dollars in a way that allows housing affordability to be retained going forward, that makes sure that Louisville stays competitive on that front.
And then last question, and you're sort of getting to my last question, which is where do you plan on targeting, particularly when we're talking percentage of AMI? What type of housing are you looking to target building with this fund? Because in the presentation, you talked about, you know, what I'll just call working class housing, and you gave some average salaries, right? Teacher salary, $40-something thousand. So a married couple, teachers, they're, you know, $90,000 as a two-person household if they had children, right? Depending on how many children. But what percentage of AMI are you talking about targeting with the fund?
So the percent of AMI is 51 to 110% of AMI, but we are not targeting a specific housing type. If it's for sale, if it's for rent, we are not putting restrictions around that currently.
Okay. The reason I have a concern is, again, I'll compliment my former colleague, Councilman Arthur, pointed out accurately that the housing needs assessment would indicate that houses that are home inventory, at 80% of AMI is at a surplus. So you have to get to 50% of AMI to start to see any significant deficit. That deficit is only 10%. In other words, according to the study, 90% of households, even at 50% AMI, are met. The housing needs are met. It gets very bad when you get down to 30% AMI. Then it's 55% is met, right? That's where the deficit is identified.
Right.
And so he made an effort to have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund focus on this particular group, right? This particular economic demographic, because that's where the most obvious need is. And I'm concerned when we talk about, you know, what I'll call average income families. Again, if I'm going to believe this report, We are actually at a surplus. If you look at 80% AMI, we have an 11% surplus in housing. If we look at 100% of AMI, a 12% surplus in housing. So it wouldn't make sense for us to target, and I just want to be careful about how we target, when we say like average working class families, yeah, I want to keep building, keep up with demand so that our affordability stays low. And at the same time, I don't see evidence that we need government subsidies or other public-private partnership subsidy for anything until we're at 50% of AMI or below. So are we targeting that? I mean, is there a way that we can target that better?
So and you all would know better than I, but my understanding of the Louisville Affordable Housing Trust Fund, for the money that Metro Council allocates every year, 50% of that has to go in that below 50% AMI. So if Metro invests 10 million, 5 million of that
Correct.
is dedicated towards that lower end of the AMI spectrum.
That's the intent, yeah.
And so if the remaining 50% is being directed to other attainable housing projects, and, if, I don't have the numbers that you shared in front of me, Councilman, but if 10% of the 40,000 unit deficit that we were talking about earlier, or a different number?
Approximately, yeah.
So even if that is 4,000 units, I still think that that's a pipeline that's worth pursuing. I mean, the numbers, depending on which report you look at, are going to vary. But I think on a pure needs basis, everything that we've read and understand is that if the number is 30,000 units or 40,000 units, there's still a significant opportunity for this type of tool to be used.
Yeah, I would just say there's a reason why we said 50%. Frankly, it should probably be like 75, 80% targeting that demographic, because the problem is even in the last 5 years, since the first report was written to the second report, that was 2016 to 2021, we put a record amount of money into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and the problem got worse because we're probably targeting the wrong group. So that's just my concern generally on how we're targeting affordable housing. But thank you, Mr. Chair, appreciate it.
Councilman Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and I don't intend to oversimplify it, but just to get my head wrapped around it, I need to simplify it. So in defining the home buyer that you've targeted here, you've taken a segment of the home buying market, but you've also taken a segment of the homes to be purchased. The people that are in this home buyer market are not going to go out and buy $1 million house. So you do have a price point that is in your equation here. And my question to you is, in providing low interest loans to this segment of the market, was there any Monte Carlo analysis or sensitivity analysis done on what effect that would have on the purchase price of those houses? Because my guess is for every percentage interest rate that you decrease, the price of those houses is going to go up. So you're going to unintentionally penalize the people you're trying to help. So do you know what affects, how much the prices are going to go up for every percentage
We
interest
didn't
rate you
look at
go
that
down?
specifically, and Robert, you might want to jump in here, but my initial thought to that is, first of all, we are not making a choice whether or not it's home buyers or renters. It could be a developer who wants to build a 300-unit rental product. It could be Rob's group who's wanting to build homes for sale. I think where home capital is coming in and helping the market is there are any number of affordable or attainable housing projects that simply do not get the financing that they need and they die on the vine because there's not this gap financing product available to make those projects pencil. And so if this fund is able to step in and serve as a gap filler to take a project that otherwise would not get built, adding more product or more supply to the system for whatever price point, in this case it's attainable housing, would have the effect of pushing prices down because there's more on the market.
So are the loans, the loans are going to the builders, not the home purchasers?
To the
right?
developer,
Right.
yeah. And so.
And you don't,
Sorry.
you don't think, I'm sorry to cut you off. You don't think that that is going to have an effect on the prices?
I think that by just, and this is maybe an oversimplification of supply and demand, the more product within a given price point that you have on the market, the lower the price would be. So if we are not able to build attainable housing because it won't pencil financially, this is just my real-time economics 101, is that you would be driving up prices because there are fewer housing offerings within that price point. If you have more developers who are able to make projects pencil because of the existence of this fund, there's a greater supply, which would drive prices down.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Did you want to end, Councilman Batchon?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to kind of, Clark, Rob, thank you all for being here. Great work. So I'm going to kind of piggyback a little bit off of what Councilman Hudson just said a little. Because one of the questions that I wrote down was, who are we loaning the money to? And right, obviously, I think it's the developer. But I think to what Councilman Hudson's point is, the interest rates of the banks and the home buyer in that 30% AMI range are struggling to borrow the money for purchasing that home, which puts them in that revolving cycle of the rental, right? Is there something in the works to capture that and assist there? Because I think we're on the right track when it comes to creating the supply and the inventory for a lower price point, but then your buyer or consumer is now stuck in the trap of 7, 8, 10% interest rates where the market is today. So there's that balancing act. Is there anything you can touch on there? And I think that may also kind of piggyback on my next question is, if you don't hit the $10 million mark on the private investment side, no money is loaned out, is that correct?
We haven't made a I'll answer it in reverse order, so I'll answer your last question first. We haven't made a determination, but I would think that we would be wanting to, if we raised $8 million instead of 10, I still think that that's money that should be allocated. And so right now we're in a concept phase. We don't have $10 million that we've raised. But if we got 8 million instead of 10, I think that our group would be absolutely in favor of allocating that and matching it with public sector investment. So just discounting it back based on whatever we've been able to raise.
And with that being said, you're going to run the underwriting through Louisville Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Correct.
To be qualified to borrow the money from the Louisville Home Capital Fund, you have to borrow from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as well?
No.
So it's one or the other or both?
Or both.
So it's essentially just a kind of gap funding?
But you do have to be underwritten
Yes.
by the trust fund. I mean, there are a few assumptions. One was that the supply is low. And so while the analytics on the needs assessment, those numbers are those 40,000 unit numbers, there's another supply assessment by Kentucky Housing Corporation that's a lower number, but it's just based on some of the dialogue that Clark and Mr. Piagentini got into about, it's not the why, it's the reality that there's not enough supply. And then the point that when you provide more supply, it changes what is available in terms of, and the impact on demand. So
Thank you for that explanation. I think this is so Councilman Owen and I had debated this, I think, a year or so ago on supply and And my thing is, I think that number is skewed. And what I mean by that is this 40,000 or 15,000 number that we're short in supply is only calculated based on if you've borrowed money from the Affordable Housing Trust money to build this property. When I've looked at some, let's use multifamily for example, a multifamily complex of 300 units can be built by a private developer at $30 million and is at $1,200 a month per unit. And then I look at an Affordable Housing Trust funded multifamily unit and then the rent rates are $200 and $300 more. And what am being told is market rate units are not calculated into that shortage number. So is where I show the numbers are skewed. Can you help pinpoint that for me?
Well, let me just make the point that there's the difference between the Metro analytics on housing needs. That number is much higher than the state, the KHC analytics on supply. That analytic is under 10,000, so it's more in the 7,000 range. But that's just supply. It's not related to the issue of affordability and what percentage you're paying. It's how many units we need, both units in terms of rental and home ownership. And at the state level, there's a lot of dialogue, and I expect it in this next session, around a 200,000 number for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, divided roughly in half for home ownership and rental. So I think it's a different issue if you're talking about supply versus needs assessment. And it's a more conservative issue to say, man, we don't have enough supply, which is where we started from. We started from the assumption, the expectation that we don't have enough supply of attainable housing, and that's why there's such a gap between the cost of housing and wages. Wages have gone up, but housing costs have gone up higher.
Yeah.
And we think that's a function of supply and demand, and we're trying to figure out how to activate supply. And we were tasked within the Bingham Fellows Group to focus on workforce housing, and that's why we're at the 51 to 110 with our.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the work. I appreciate the education on that. And I think you answered kind of most all the questions I had, so thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I don't have anybody else in the queue. Anybody else have anything they want to discuss before we let these guys go on their merry way? Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming in, presenting. I think there's more discussion to be had.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 2, getting into the legislation portion, is O-295-25, an ordinance amending Section 115 of the Louisville Metro Code of Ordinances regarding homeless shelter regulations. Can I get a motion? Properly moved and seconded. Let's see. Betsy, do you want to start here, or do we want to start with the county attorneys, or how do you want to start on this? Okay, I'll turn it over to Councilwoman Rui, and she'll get us started.
Okay, so thank you very much. We've been waiting quite a while to get this ordinance back up here, so we have the licensing. So what we're looking at is the accessory overnight shelters. We did the pop-up shelters, and we know we got snow on the ground. And everybody, thank you for staying the other night till almost 11 o'clock and saying yes. So anyway, so we went through the ordinance the way Laura put it out and looked at what Joel Dock put together. And we've got an amendment that kind of blends the two, and there are a couple of points of discussion that we're probably going to want to talk about. And at this point, I will turn it over.
Laura Ferguson, Assistant County Attorney. Yes, there's an amendment in the system that I believe was based on some conversations subsequent to the ordinance being filed, and it just sort of provides some clarifications on what provisions accessory overnight shelters would be subject to and which ones they would not. I think most of the clarifications are in the duties of the operator section as to what would apply or not apply to it.
Can we highlight, just for the kind of the record, what the maybe just a highlight of what the major changes are in the amendment? Is that something that we can do, or is that?
Yeah, the changes are double underlined, and for the most part, I would say that the main changes are when it was filed, was sort of left as an open issue as to what duties of the operator in page 7, which things would be included in the accessory overnight shelter and which ones would not. And essentially, the first several provisions now, if you see the double underlined, it adds accessory overnight shelter and accessory overnight shelter for criminal record checks, for those that deal with children, information about CPR, written policies and procedures on the handling of prescription or over-the-counter drugs, maintaining sanitary conditions, et cetera. And then there's also a little bit of an addition at the very end in 115.010, the enforcement, which just gave the director a little more flexibility to make interpretations to ensure public health, safety, and welfare with respect to the license, and that the interpretations, if they're made, would be published on the Metro website. But there are not a lot of not a lot of changes between what was filed and what this current amendment is.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Anybody else have things they want to discuss here? Councilman Batchon, did you have anything you want to discuss here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I think, do we need to move the amendment first? Or, yes, before we discuss?
Sonia Harvey, the clerk. So are you going to discuss the amendment before, or are you going to, it depends, it's on you.
I
Yeah,
have no
I mean, I
I
discussion on
think
the
you
amendment.
want the amendment before you, right? But I'm not
Before we
sure.
discuss specifics of the amendment. So you have things specifically to the amendment that you want to discuss, so you'd like to have it moved before you discuss those things. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have an amendment in front of us. Are you the sponsor of the amendment is Councilwoman Rui? Okay, good. Do we need a second on that amendment?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. So we have an amended ordinance in front of us, Councilman Batchon.
On the amendment ordinance, on the only thing that I would like to question or bring up to ask my colleagues and the county attorney and maybe the planning staff to help me understand is asking about the staffing and making sure that there's someone on site 24/7. So if this is an operation that is operating and, they're closed the doors at 11 o'clock for reentry, and I think this, Joel and Julia, for your all's perspective, I think I'm talking about it in the definition of the overnight, accessory overnight shelter. When the doors close at 11 o'clock, you're not allowing anybody else to be able to enter. Will there be staff on site until the next day? Right? I think there should be someone on staff or volunteering to oversee 24/7. I'd like to have some discussion around that. Aside from that, just for full clarity, I think Councilwoman Rui has done an exceptional job in trying to bring this forward and get us moving in the right direction as we have promised after we passed the first set. So thank you. My biggest concern at this point is the staffing portion. I think everything else is kind of covered and under control.
Great, thank you. Joel, can you help us with this?
Joel Dock, Louisville Metro's Office of Planning. So in the definition of accessory overnight shelter in LMCO on page 2 of this license, which is the definition of accessory overnight shelter, which is the same definition that we find in the Land Development Code. It reads after the first very long sentence, the facility shall be staffed by paid employees or volunteers that manage daily operations to ensure compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So the definition itself requires that the facility be staffed.
But yes, I understand it requires that, Joel, and I thank you for that explanation. but it doesn't say it has to be required to be staffed 24/7. And I think my fear in that is, let's use this domestic violence situation, for example. If someone is being housed for a domestic violence issue or so on and so forth, and God forbid, the offender is located, the person who is being, excuse me, at this church or facility, and comes to retaliate in some facet, who is going to be able to man that facility, call the police, call the authorities, and address issues as they happen? Does that make sense where I'm kind of going there?
It does make sense, and there's not a specific provision in here that requires it to be staffed 24/7. But in my experience working with different homeless shelter operators, those that intend to operate an accessory overnight shelter, even those that operate transitional housing, those facilities are either staffed or have someone present that oversees the facility overnight.
Just for peace of mind, I would like to see it in black and white. So I don't know what that will take, and how we can handle that. Is that a Laura Ferguson question, or is that a you question? Anybody feel free to chime in when they want.
Just for the record, I think, well, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. I want to make sure that we don't, I don't think it's a bad idea. Let me start by saying that. I don't think it's a bad idea. Obviously, if there's somebody there, that's better. I just want to make sure we're not trying to think of every possible scenario that might arise and over-regulate based on all possible scenarios. So I'm not against it. I just think at one level, allowing the people who are doing this to make those calls and decisions might be better than us putting it within the regulation. And again, I'm not against it. I just wanted to raise that as a possibility to some of my fellow colleagues who might be worried about overregulation.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't disagree with you. And to that point, I've reached out to a couple pastor friends and church administrators that I know, and we've had this conversation. I mean, I was earlier in prepared to make, the motion to remove the exemption for tuberculosis testing and require that to happen and things. So I've lightened up on some of those things.
Okay.
I think this is an absolute need.
Okay.
And I would like to make the motion of some form to include that into this language.
Okay, so I think Councilman Batchon has made a motion. We need a second. Councilwoman Rui seconds. Any discussion about this amendment, this motion?
Do we know exactly where it's going to go?
Yeah, if I might, I know we're mid-motion, so I don't know when the best time to do this is, but Travis Feaster, Assistant County Attorney. One of the things Laura and I are over here looking for is primarily what this amendment is taking the existing homeless shelter requirements and eliminating ones that aren't appropriate for these sort of scaled-down accessory overnight shelters that religious buildings are running, right? Because they can't meet the very high standards for a constantly in operation homeless shelter. And there isn't a requirement for a homeless shelter that specifically says in exact English, there shall be 24/7 staff on site. But the definition of homeless shelter requires staffing while active, and the sort of requirements in the staffing section of the ordinance all are assuming that, in the duties of the operator section, that this all occurs more or less while things are active. And in fact, there's some language about, at one point, access to restrooms during hours of operation. So clearly, if the shelter's not operating, they're not required to give folks access to restroom facilities. My point is, I think there's an implication here that is already in place for homeless shelters that would apply to accessory shelters as well. But we don't have a section that we can just unstrike through and say, well, we're going to make this apply to both of them because it that language in exactly that phrase doesn't exist currently. So if we're going to add that in, we need to think about where we're adding it and then what other uses it's going to apply to. And probably something a little more complex than shall operate 24/7, because some of these accessory shelters might only pop up during certain events. And so we don't want to need them, we don't want to require them to staff when they're not in operation. So there's some things to think about here, and I don't know where it's best housed.
So go ahead, Councilman Batchon.
Thank you. So to your point, Travis, I think the wording should say something along the lines of, sorry, got a catch. Something along the lines of, while in operation of an overnight accessory shelter, staff must be on site through 24 hours. I mean, something of that, along those lines.
Can I make a suggestion? And I think this is what Travis was saying, that we're trying to make as much as possible for the temporary overnight shelters and the affordable to have the same kind of regulatory context. And this, we would be adding regulation to the temporary overnight that doesn't exist for the 24-hour-a-day homeless shelters. If we think it's important to do what is being proposed here, I think we should take a step back and not do it in this context, in this meeting. We should take a step back and look at how that would affect the whole grouping of both the 24-hour permanent shelters and this classification, rather than doing it just for this classification, if that makes sense. Joel, does that make sense what I'm saying? And is that something that we might be able to do if we think if we think about it more as we go and decide it's something we need to do?
It does make sense, and I think, and Travis, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and in writing the definition of both accessory overnight and modifying the definitions for homeless shelter and the extreme weather provisions, the way that it was written up, these are overnight shelters. Day operations are something completely different. So even in the intent of the definition, I very much think that in writing this, from my perspective and understanding how these operate, that the intent of the definition was to require that it be staffed while it is operating.
Mr. Chair?
Because it is overnight only, and that's how I understand these facilities operate anyway. So I think to the Assistant County Attorney's point, it's implied already in the definition, and
Councilman Batchon.
To Joel's point, I think I see what he's saying. It being an overnight accessory shelter, and I'm using the domestic violence one as an example, right? They're still going to be there the next morning. Is staff going to be there with them? It's the next morning, it's not overnight. I'm just looking at some context around someone needs to be volunteer or paid employee of the facility at all times.
Joel.
And again, in writing these definitions and thinking about how they operate and talking about the operators, a simple modification to the definition would still be, I think, exactly how it's written, because I think these facilities will be staffed or have volunteers present the entire time they are operating.
So I will sort of try to restate what I was saying before again. I don't disagree with what you're trying to do. I do think it is wiser for us as a body not to do it at this time, just for this classification. If we think it's important, I think we should take a step back and then look at the classifications that are related and determine whether we need similar language in each one in a separate instance. That's my thought process on it. Councilwoman Rui.
Okay, thank you. I just want to read exactly what it says in the definition. So it says the facility shall be staffed by paid employees or volunteers that manage daily operations to ensure compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So the daily operations in this case are nightly operations. And so the requirement is already in there that they would be staffed. So, yeah, I think
Again,
I'm
it's-
okay with that as it is.
I think, to Joel's point, there's strong implication there without it saying specifically overnight. And I just want, my fear again is I want as much consistency as possible within classifications, and that's, yeah. Councilman Batchon, did you want to jump back in at this point?
Guys, I hear you, and with all due respect, I think there's, needs to be some type of requirement that is said in black and white that there needs to be someone on site at all times while in operation. Joel and I hear what you're saying, and you said, I think, and I'm pretty sure, or your words, like, that it's going to be staffed. We all think it should be until it's that one time where it's not. So I think Travis is trying to chime in, but.
Travis, you want to jump in here?
Laura and I are still discussing over here, and Joel, I want you to see if you have any issues with this as well, but our thought would be in the definitions after the facility shall be staffed, to add the phrase during operating hours, and then continue, by paid employees or volunteers. I think that's getting at what you're getting at without, if we put it in one of these other subsections, we need to knock out other uses. It's going to be probably more complicated than we can do on the fly. But I think if we want to add that small phrase to the definition of during operating hours, I think that more or less gets at what you're wanting here. But correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm okay with that if you're telling me that from midnight to 6 a.m. is operating hours and someone is staffed there, and from 6:01 a.m. to 11:59 p.m., no one is staying or sleeping or spending the day in that facility, so then there's no staff required. Is that what I'm understanding?
Generally, yes. I mean, these are religious facilities, so folks are typically welcome throughout the day. So there's a little bit of nuance there. But as far as the sort of shelter use, the overnight, I mean, it's right there in the name. That's the intention.
Then I will agree to what you're saying, Travis.
And I actually think doing it within the definition like that alleviates my concerns as well, so.
And that was my point. I wanted
makes-
it to be done in the
Yeah,
definition, not
that's
in the
fair.
whole
That's fair.
context, so.
Okay, so do anybody else have any questions or comments about the amendment that's in front of us? Councilman Hudson?
Yeah, so which definition is it you're modifying?
For accessory overnight shelters. Now, I will note that this will put us out of sync between the Land Development Code and the LMCO, but I think we can correct that on the back end if need be. And ultimately, for the license, it will be required, so.
So at the end of the definition for accessory overnight shelter, you're adding the words during operating hours.
It would go in the second to last sentence. The facility shall be staffed during operating hours by paid employees or volunteers, et cetera.
So do we need to make that in the form of a motion? Okay.
So the motion's been made. I think we just identified exactly where it was going.
Yep.
Which I think can be done within the motion and second that we've already have in front of us.
Okay.
Are you good, Councilman Hudson?
Yes.
Okay, anybody else? All right, all those in favor of the amendment that's in front of us, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Any more discussion on this before we open this up for a roll call vote?
So that was just the first amendment that we need to take, that was just the amendment, the second tier amendment, if we vote on the full amendment. Because we haven't even accepted what's on paper yet.
I thought we did already vote on, voted
This-
to
What we
amend
just
the
voted
first.
on was the amendment to the amendment.
No, we put it, I
right?
thought we just put it, you got the vote on it? I thought we just, okay. All right.
It was voice vote. It was unanimous for the First Amendment, and this is the second one. So I think we're good.
Very simple, very short. I just want to, again, thank my colleagues for working on this and thank the staff and planning staff for making these amendments and giving us the right track to move forward so we can make sure that the religious facilities that are wanting to help and are willing to help and are in our communities doing great work, the opportunity to do more great work. So So thank you, and I am a yes and moving this forward, so thank you.
Thank you, and I want to say that as well. This happened quickly, and Laura, appreciate the fast action, and Travis and everybody that worked on it. Happy to get this thing moved through. So, Cheryl, can you, Councilwoman Rui.
Okay, thank you. I just want to ensure that, as we're talking about these different things, that the section regarding the TB tests and the tuberculosis got pulled out. Is that correct, Laura? Okay, because we know that was a particular burden on people to, when you're only a volunteer, and you're only there once, and et cetera. So I just want to make sure that one's out of there.
Was that a yes, Laura?
Yes, in section 11505 and 21, it says subsections 4 through 8, which are really the tuberculosis sections, shall not apply to accessory overnight shelters. So that language is in there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Without further ado, Cheryl, will you open up the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Raymond?
Yes.
Thank you. Vote is closing. Chair, you have 7 yes votes.
So with unanimous vote, that can be moved to the consent calendar. It's amendment. That's true. It's amended, so it'll have to be moved to old business at the next council, on the next council agenda. Okay, item number 3 will be holding, as we've discussed in the past. That's the temporary moratorium on data centers. We'll be holding that and moving on to number 4, which is R-161-25, a resolution requesting the Planning Commission consider rezoning the property located at 1901 R Payne Street to a lower, more appropriate zoning classification. Can I get a motion? Motion, second. Properly moved and seconded. I suppose that I will, as the sponsor, I will just start with explaining how this came about. 1901 R Payne Street is the primary location for the manufacturing facility of Givaudan. And it's zoned M2 currently and has been zoned industrial for a long time. And the company operating there originally, or operating there in the past couple of decades, has been a local company called D.D. Williamson and Company, and they were bought out a number of years ago by Givaudan. At this site, there have been 2 explosions within the last 20 years that have done significant property damage both to the facility itself and to neighboring residents, and there have also been fatalities associated with both of those explosions. So the request here is for the Planning Commission to look at this property that's historically been zoned industrial, M2, which is a pretty intense use of industrial zoning, and determine whether, because of the neighboring residential properties, that we should downzone this property to be something of a less intense use. So let me say, with that being said, I will say that I don't, by filing this resolution, I don't think that as a city we ought to go around filing similar resolutions for properties that are historically zoned industrial and are near residential, because I don't think it's fair to the companies that are operating under those historic assumptions. I mean, it's a major penalty for the type of business, the type of zoning that affects the type of business you can do on that property. For the government to proactively change that when there haven't been specific events like the ones I just mentioned, I think is improper. In this case, because of what I would call the unicorn type of nature of what has happened historically at this location, I think it's proper that we try to address this. Now, one more thing I'll say is that very early after the most recent explosion, the mayor and I talked about whether we thought it was appropriate for industrial zoning, a similar type of activity or similar type of business to continue operating at the site after the two incidences that we've discussed previously. And we very kind of quickly decided that we didn't think that that was the case. And we have said that to both our constituents since the very beginning, and also to the company Givaudan since the very beginning. I thought it was appropriate that I reach out to the company to talk to them about this resolution, and I have done that. And the response from the company was basically, this is not something that we weren't expecting. It was something that we were expecting. They asked what kind of zoning designation we were thinking, and I said that's sort of up to the Planning Commission and how they respond to our request, but that I have also said publicly, as the council person in the district, that I would like to see something that allowed for a mixed-use type of development with some sort of density. That won't surprise anybody in this room or anybody listening, because that's kind of my approach to most things along the lines of development. So I told them that we didn't have the control exactly of what the designation was going to become, but that I would like it to be something along those lines. And the company at this point said, what we would like more than anything is that whatever you do it quickly so we know what kind of hand we have, and then we are allowed to go ahead and play the hand that we have. So that's kind of how this came about. Let me see, I have Councilman Piagentini in the queue first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to be clear, I have a few comments here. Comments I've already spoken to the chairman about, because I didn't want to surprise him with my thoughts, but I want to be clear that I will be supporting, I can't vote here on committee, I will be supporting this in council with the caveat of some of my concerns sort of being on the table. And the reason I'm doing that is because I will acknowledge this is a very, very unique circumstance. And the fact that we're using the term explosion twice in 20 years, I mean, that's a lot. And I know people that were impacted, small business owners and others that were impacted by this, not to mention the immediate residents, but I know people personally who were impacted. And so I'm very sensitive to it. But here is my concern with the precedent of it. There are many areas of this city where residents would like to see downzoning. And so, for example, some may remember articles about a concrete plant going up in District 19. That plant was on M2 zoned land. That M2 zoning was there before the abutting residential neighborhood is Lake Forest, before Lake Forest existed. So that was already zoned heavy industrial. The concrete plant went up. And trust me when I tell everybody that the residents there would love me to downzone that chunk of land, but I don't have the blessing of the landowner. They're not indicating they plan on moving it in any way. So, and therein lies the concern, right? And I'll give you another example. In Floyd's Fork, all the debate we did about that, there are people that want me to take some of the R4 zoning and downzone it to RR. They want to keep it very rural, very, very low-density residential. But again, we don't own that property, and I'm loath to do that without the property owners. If whatever comes out of the Planning Commission here, if the landowners come back and what I'll call don't fight it, if they come back and say, we could live with this. Maybe they're not loving it, but they're not hating it, then I have then I'm going to approve it, right? Because at the end of the day, if the landowner is fine with the change, then who cares if they initiated, you initiated, as long as they ultimately are good with the product. If they're not, I have concerns both for the precedent issue and also the potential takings issue, right? If we downzone a property which affects the land value of a private citizen, right, in this case a company, but whether it's a company or an individual is irrelevant, then we open ourselves up to a potential lawsuit because we have taken value without due process, right? We would, when we take property for road construction, we compensate, right? So there would be that potential issue. I would also like to voice the idea, and I hope the Planning Commission listens, about alternatives, depending, and again, even if we go down a specific pathway here, other alternatives to separate heavy industrial and residential, such as buffer zones. It's something that came up in discussions again around the concrete plant, and I think another example would be good here, that wouldn't affect existing operations on existing land, but if we start to say, and other jurisdictions have done this, there are certain uses that you cannot put within a certain distance of residential, then I think that's an alternative route to maybe get to the solution without going full downzoning, right? But anyway, I just want to put that out there as a potential idea, something I do want to work on with the Planning Commission at some point. Again, I'll just wrap up. Those are my comments. I just wanted to make sure they were on the record, but that I will absolutely vote for this because of the unique circumstances, but I don't want people surprised, depending on how this nets out, if the worst case scenario happens and we have this big conflict, I may have a tough time voting for it on the floor when it comes back. But I would like to see what happens here, and I support your effort to address a very, very difficult scenario. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Batchon.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I first want to say I understand what you're trying to do, and I respect that. But I'm generally on the surface a little opposed to giving us the jurisdiction to downzone a property, whether you have a verbal commitment or not of the landowner. I think they should go through the due process of rezoning it on their own. If they're okay with it, let them rezone it, and let's do what we can to expedite that process for them so we can get to where they need to be. I just want to put that out there because I think we're opening up a can of worms that we may not be able to close. Thank you.
Councilman Bratcher.
Can I ask us some historical question? Was this built before the surrounding residential areas or vice versa?
Does anybody in the planning staff have more historical reference than I do? I mean, I think what Councilman Piagentini had this discussion a little bit. A lot of times, historically, a facility was built, and then a lot of housing was built around it for the people who worked there, and they wanted to live close to work, so they could be, they could access their job easily. Everyone didn't have a car, and so a lot of facilities, particularly in the west end of Louisville, I think that was absolutely the case. Whether in this case, which came first, the facility or the housing around it, I'm not entirely sure. Do you guys have any historical reference? Not so much either. So I don't know is the answer.
And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but is this being driven by your constituency?
This is being, my constituents are very interested in this no longer being an industrial facility.
And I try, I'm just new here, but I want to defer to the local councilman or woman on a lot of these issues. I'm kind of like Councilman Khalil. I'm not really crazy about doing this because of what's been told. Like Mr. Piagentini said that you're taking profits away maybe from this group, and that could be open a whole can of worms. But anyway, I will heavily favor when the final vote the fact that you're pushing this because your constituents are asking you to do it. Thank you.
Councilman Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this may be an obvious question, but the company does own this land?
They do.
Okay. Is there any other, I've been on planning and zoning for close to 9 years. This is the first time that I can ever remember anything like this. Has anything like this been done in the city since merger?
Brian, do you want to, or anybody, I guess, from your group, talk a little bit about authority to do, and then whether we have done this, ever done it, or done it recently.
I'll change the rules on us. We forget to hit the button every time now, see? Brian Davis, Louisville Metro Office of Planning. We have completed multiple area-wide rezonings for various reasons, whether it's associated with the neighborhood plan, associated with some other requests from either Metro Council or the Planning Commission. Both the Planning Commission and any legislative body has authority to initiate an area-wide change. So whenever we receive such a request, then, we look at that, we make a recommendation, it goes through the Planning Commission, it makes a recommendation to the legislative bodies. In the last year, earlier this year, the city of Jeffersontown did an area-wide rezoning on some property that they had annexed, and so it's not uncommon for a city to initiate such zoning requests. Now, have we had one that's been initiated by an event like this? I'm not familiar with anything. Julia may have something for us here, so I'll let her chime in as well. So,
I don't know that we've had any initiated in this manner, but we have had a couple of resolutions from council about turning properties into like different residential. There was one in Berrytown.
Sure.
There was one in like the Watson Lane Elementary. And then one is off of Dixie Highway for veterans housing. Those three probably came in either early this year or last year. That was somewhat similar. Those properties were owned by Metro, though.
And Julia, this is Laura Ferguson. Wasn't there an area-wide rezoning along Lexington Road that was done several years ago?
Yes.
For some of the industrial properties in that area?
Right. So there was a planned development district that was done along Lexington Road, somewhat similar or in the same general vicinity of that industrial site. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Give it on. Mm.
I think what I was getting at, if I could just pop back in, thank you, is a specific situation or instance of specific industrial downzoning.
well, right now, we're actually in the middle of a project where we've been working with the land banks, at land bank properties, looking at those that are zoned EZ1. They are primarily owned by Louisville Metro government and possibly downzoning those out of EZ1 to a more appropriate district. So that's something that we're working on right now. We're still a few months away from you all seeing it, but that's something that we've been researching for a little while now.
Okay, and then my last question is for the chair, who has been working with the company owner. You said that they were expecting it. Are they pleased about it?
I think you'd have to ask them.
Yeah.
I think, I can only say that they were anticipating it, yes. Okay, thank you. Councilman Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I'm going to be parked on the opposition on this one. The project that Metro is working to downgrade EZ1, I mean, we own that property, so that, I don't know that that's apples to apples. If the owner of this property had requested a downzoning, I could support it. But the government coming in and by fiat taking the zoning down, I mean, because of some accidents that happened. If it was reckless, if it was intentional, then maybe some punitive actions are in order, but they did not intend for this explosion to happen. Several years ago, GE Appliances had a building go up in flames that rained down plastic on houses all over the area surrounding them. Are we going to downgrade theirs? You know, planes come off run off the runway at Bowman Field multiple times. Are we going to downgrade Bowman Field? I can't support this one.
Councilman Batchon.
Thank you. Julia, I think, answered the question because she was talking about the Watson Lane and Dixie Highway. Obviously, we own those properties, and we're rezoning them for a specific use. Again, hard pressed to say yes to this because I think we are just opening that can of worms. I understand what you're trying to do. I think they should go through the process to rezone it in the manner that they should. when that happened, I remember a zoning case in my district that was going to be an M2 zoning, and I think Brian and Julia can remember this, that I caught a ton of backlash on because it was a couple weeks after this explosion happened. But it allowed us to also learn and understand what type of binding elements and things we can put on that property moving forward, so we mitigate the risk of anything catastrophes happening of that nature. So if you said, hey, I would like to suggest adding these specific binding elements to this property in some facet, it's cheaper than rezoning it, and allowing the owners to do that and getting their blessing, we'd probably be having a different conversation here. But that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Councilman Bratcher.
Well, are they going to speak, the owners going to speak on it, or is they give you all they're going to give you? Do you know?
They will, I would guess that once I don't think that they would speak until we hear back from the Planning Commission, because that's what we're asking the Planning Commission to take a look at it and say, what do you think? Do you think this should be downzoned? So I think maybe once that happens, then that would be an opportunity for them to reach out to my office or reach out to the mayor or speak about it.
I've heard a couple of my colleagues say they would like to see it go through the system. What is the process? What is the system? If this say does not pass, what is the system like they were?
I think what they're talking about is if the property is going to be rezoned, that they want it to be, that the process to be started, to be initiated by the owner.
Oh, I see.
That's the process, the rezoning process. It typically comes from either the owner or an applicant that has an option or some sort of contractual ability to purchase the property is who usually is who initiates the process.
And I asked this question once, I'll just quickly say it again. Are they going to be losing, value? They're going to lose value if we do this, right? And we're just basically, the government is taking that value away.
So it depends. I think that if you talk to an appraiser, a property that is zoned with a higher intensity use can be worth more money. Depends on where it is. In this case, I'm not sure that's entirely true. I think depending on what the proposed rezoning was, if it allowed for, some mixed use and some, relatively dense rezoning with residential and some other things, then I'm not sure that that's entirely true. It just depends. And I think it's a reasonable question to ask. It's not that. And while I have my speaker going, I will say again that I agree with my colleagues in theory. I do not think that we should make a habit of doing this. I think that this is a unicorn property frankly, a unicorn company because, yes, accidents happen, but accidents happen in the same place over multiple times. To me, that was enough to make it so I think it is worth taking this step. Again, I would not do it without that the things that had happened there historically. So I just wanted to make sure that I said that again. Councilman Reed.
Thank you. And this will be my last comment. So this is a resolution. This isn't any sort of binding ordinance at the moment. And I want to learn more about it. And that's the reason why I'm going to vote yes to get it out of committee, because this is just authorizing the Planning Commission to look at it and come back with a recommendation. That doesn't mean we have to take the recommendation. So I'm anxious to see what they come back with. So I'll be in support. Thank you.
And I do appreciate that, Councilman Reed, and I think that's what Councilman Piagentini had told me as well, that he kind of wanted to see the resolution go forward so we could hear back from the Planning Commission, and then if you have a particular stance based on that recommendation, similar to the ones we've heard here today, I think that would be the more opportune time to take that stand. And I would hope that the resolution itself today would go through so we could hear back from the Planning Commission and hear their thoughts. So I would encourage you to support this, even if ultimately you may be a no vote on what the Planning Commission comes back with. Okay. With that said, I have no more speakers here. This is a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so I think let's do a roll call so we know what we have here.
Voting's open. Councilmember Raymond,
Yes.
voting's closing. Chair, you have 4 yes votes and 3 no votes.
Okay, 4-3, this will go on old business on the next council agenda. Okay, without any further agenda items in front of us, anybody else have anything else they want to discuss before we adjourn? Without hearing anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.